Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship. I'm your host, coach and journalist Becky Mollenkamp. Feminist Founders is a listener-funded podcast. Your contributions enable me to continue bringing you these important conversations without corporate advertising. To support the mission, head to feministfounderspodcast.com and sign up for a paid subscription. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to today's show. Greetings. Today's guest is Ola Akimowo. She is the artist behind the Free Black Women's Library in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. And we had an amazing conversation that I'm really thrilled you get to listen to because she's so awesome and is doing such great work in the world for so little money and recognition, and I hope that we can be a piece of changing that because what she's doing is really important. The space is a grassroots space of 5,000 books. Actually, I think several thousand more than that at this point, all written by Black women and Black non-binary folks. In addition to the book piece, which we talk about, it's also a free store, a period pantry. They have a backyard garden, a reading club, all sorts of free programming to help the community. The work she's doing is important, and it's such a great example of what's possible when we try. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ola. Hi, Ola. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good. We're having tech issues. And so we're doing this interview on Zoom, which is different than the regular platform I host on. So if things sound or seem different, that's why, but we're going to make it work and it's going to be great. Before we start talking about the Free Black Women's Library, which I'm excited to chat about, first I want to hear from you about your relationship with feminism.
Hopefully this answer won't be too long-winded, but I do identify as a Black feminist, and what that means for me is I am in alignment with the works and theories and legacy of Black women, activists, thinkers, scholars like Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, Fannie Lou Hamer, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde. They're writing the Combahee River Collective, all of these different entities, collectives of women who have done work around the ideas around safety for Black women, Black queer folks, Black marginalized folks, ideas around access to decent housing, healthcare, education, just basically working towards us being treated as human beings and being able to exist and thrive in the world, doing work that is pretty much combating ideas around like capitalism, patriarchy, racism, sexism. So for me, Black feminism is like an integral part of my praxis, my creative praxis, my spiritual praxis, my political praxis as well. And it bleeds into everything. It bleeds into the way I build community, the way I parent, my friendships, my romantic relationships, all those different things. I'm not sure who it was that said the personal is political. I'm not sure who said that, but I 100% agree. So I call myself a Black feminist. I've been calling myself that for about 2 decades now. And I know that a lot of times when people think about feminism, they don't necessarily picture Black women. They think about like burning bras and like the suffragettes and getting the right to vote. But for me, it's so much more than that. It goes beyond that, right? It's equal pay for the same work, but it's also reproductive justice and being able to have access to abortions or fertility treatments. It's it's being able to live as a person and have the same opportunities that other people have, right? So yeah, to me it's really important, and I don't think you need to be necessarily like a woman, like born a woman or identify as a woman to identify as a feminist or a Black feminist.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think we're in alignment, so that's great. And you mentioned some amazing people like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and the Combahee River Collective and all of these folks who I'm trying to use my fancy segue to bring us into books because so many of them have written some incredibly powerful books on these very topics and others. And you obviously have a love of books, I would
Mm,
think, for you to be doing this thing that you're doing, right? You would have to, I think, have a passion for reading. So, what got you, like, can you think back to what really made you start to fall in love with reading? You said libraries are sacred spaces. I think that's beautiful. Like, what made you feel that way? And how did that evolve for you, that love of reading and books?
Well, I've always loved books. It's true. I've always loved to read. And I think part of what reading did for me as a young person was it offered me a sense of escape from the environment that I was in. I grew up in a household that was unstable, a little chaotic, toxic, sometimes violent, and also didn't really find a lot of safety in my school situations either. So when it came to books and discovering books and reading, I felt like I could like jump into a story and be taken on a trip, right? I've always described books as portals to another world, another dimension. And they also let me know that the world I was living in was not the only world that existed, that there was more for me out there. So it was a really easy, simple way to travel. And it also kind of sparked my creativity, right? Because I've been an artist and a creative person from a very young age. So they gave me so much. Books gave me so much. And once I started to discover books where there were characters that I could identify with because they either were dealing with the same situations as me, or the characters looked like me or sounded like me or had my name, that made it even more exciting, right? Because it was this thing of models of possibility, like, okay, this place that you're in, there's actually an opportunity, there's a possible chance that you might be able to remove yourself from this place. You might be able to escape this place. And libraries have always been the most wonderful places on earth, right? Because all the books you could ever imagine about any topic that you ever want, no matter how niche it might be, whether it's some wanting to learn about butterflies or solar power or 50s fashion, you'll find a book and that will give you details and history and themes about your interests. And you don't have to pay for these books. You can borrow these books. You can take them home. You can hold on to them. You can read them. You can bring them back. You can take them out again. Just so exciting. Like I was like, who came up with this? This is the most
Right.
genius idea. So I spent a lot of time in the library. I spent a lot of time, I used to cut school instead of going to school. I would go to the library and I would just be there all day in a corner, just reading books. And I found myself feeling really comforted. I found myself feeling really just like supported in a way by these books. So that's where it started, and it just kind of grew from there. Um, and I always think that books are like one of the most important things that we have in society, and the library is the most important cultural institution that we have. And you can tell a lot about a community by the way it structures its libraries and by the type of books that are in the libraries of the community. So that's
Yeah.
part of what made me kind of start this project, is wanting to offer my community a really precious resource, and just wanting people to have a similar experience to what I had, feeling like, oh, the world is not just this tiny little heartache and pain that I'm dealing with, the world has so much more to offer. And these books are an example.
I think that last piece might be part of where you're going to go with what I'm about to talk about, which is libraries exist. They're in every community, right? And they are this wonderful, amazing resource. And you also still decided to start something called the Free Black Women's Library. There's already libraries. And from what I understand, your project isn't actually a library. It's certainly not through the library system. It's called a library, but I know it's not exactly a library in the way we typically think of them. And it's not really a business or a bookstore. You call it a social art project.
Mm-hmm.
So first explain what a social art project means, and or I guess whichever way you want to come at this. What is a social art project, and why start a Black women's library when there's already libraries?
Well, a social art project is a project that engages people in the same way that an art piece would, right? So when you think about paintings, sculpture, films, performing arts, all these different things, like what's the purpose of art? It's to invoke emotion, it's to invoke ideas, it's to inspire, it's to kind of confront certain aspects of society. Art is meant to engage the person who is, experiencing it, right? And social art is meant to engage people in a way where they're socially interacting, not just with the work, but with each other, right? There's different community art projects. And some people might call them public facing art projects. But they're basically things that are projects that are community based and that allow people to have that same experience that they would from going to an art exhibit. So when you go to an art exhibit, you might see a bunch of gorgeous paintings and it makes you think, wow, like this is so beautiful. I would like to go home and paint as well. Or look at how this person uses color. I'm interested in using color in my work in the same way. Or, oh my God, this piece is so beautiful. It makes me want to cry. Like all these different things. And social art is this pretty much the same thing, but it's socially, right? It's community. It's about people interacting. Whereas a painting can just hang and be beautiful, with social art, there is an interactive element to it. So there are social art projects that involve food, where it's like a dinner, where it's a culinary based, right? So with my project, it's literary based. And this is not my first social art project. My first one was based in green spaces within urban environments. And I used to do a community garden book tour where I would take a whole crew of people on a tour all over Brooklyn. We would visit 13 community gardens in one day, and we would stop at each one by bike. We would stop at each one and we would interact with the gardeners. We would ask questions. We would look at the bees. We would look at the chickens, the flowers, the peach trees, and talk about the importance of nature within urban spaces and the importance of like landmarks and eco-activism and things like that. Really awesome. So that was my very first social art project. This is my second one, and this one has grown uh, out of this world.
Yeah, I want to talk about that growth in a second.
Yeah,
But first, what made you decide to do this project then around books? And you mentioned books with the garden thing. So was there books involved in that one too?
not so much. No,
Okay.
not so much. The community garden project, um, I was really focused on just the importance of nature within urban environments and in learning about ideas around nature deficit disorder and how growing up in spaces that don't have access to a lot of greens to access to a lot of green, how that affects us like mentally, and also how it affects like children as far as like their development. But the way the library came to be was through my activism, because I was doing a lot of work around state violence, and the different issues that were happening at the time and still going on, unfortunately, as far as like women and girls being victims of police violence, state violence. And it was starting to affect me mentally and spiritually doing this work. I was doing a lot of like protests, marches, petitioning, just feeling like I was like shouting into the ether and not being heard. And I felt like all of the energy that I was putting out there to try to bring attention to the fact that Black women and girls were being killed by the police, or being harmed, being sexually assaulted. There was so much taking place, and it felt like nobody cared. I was like, nobody cares. Just how come nothing's happening? How come no one's paying attention to this? How come no one's talking about this? And it was starting to affect me doing this work.
Yeah, you
Uh,
mentioned when we talked briefly before to prepare for this, you had said that it felt victimizing, like this sort of like, please look at us, please think about
yeah,
us.
yeah,
Yeah, that's heavy.
yeah, yeah. Trying to get people to see your humanity is very demoralizing because it's like, look at me, I'm a human being, and you don't see me as a human being. You just see me as something to be used and thrown away or something that's taking up space. And that was the attitude I was getting. That was what the attitude that I was seeing, whether it was like through social media, whether it was through like regular media, TV, film, whatever, the news. It just felt like nobody was paying attention. And I was like, if I continue down this path, I am going to have a mental breakdown because I felt in my spirit that it was starting to affect me mentally, right? And I already struggle with depression and anxiety, and it felt like it was making it worse. But I didn't want to give up on the work, right? I didn't want to give up on the idea of really amplifying the struggles that Black women and girls face. But I felt like I had to take a different approach. So I said, instead of seeing myself or instead of presenting us as victims that needed to be saved by society, I'm going to switch gears and present us in a different manner. I need to look at myself in a different manner. I need to look at myself not as someone that needs to be saved, but as someone who offers worth and value to every situation. And being somebody who's always loved books and who's always loved libraries, I was like, this is a very simple way for me to show how much Black women have offered to society. The intellectual labor and the creative labor that Black women have given to this country and to the world at large. I can amplify this, right? I can platform this, and it won't feel like I'm victimizing, right? It will feel like I'm celebrating, right? So I was like, I'm going to do work that centers and celebrates the lives of Black women, Black girls, Black queer folks, instead of saying, oh my God, will somebody do something to help us, right?
Yeah, it
So
felt more like you. Oh, sorry. You had said it felt more empowering to do that,
yeah,
more radical than marching on the street, which often I think a lot of people frame that as like sort of the most radical way of showing up if you're trying to do more activist or advocacy work. And you found this actually felt far more empowering and radical for you, which is really interesting, I think.
yeah, I mean, it was a theory, and honestly, it was a theory and an experiment back in 2014 when I first started it. And I was like, let me see if this works. Let me see how this goes. And it actually worked out really well. Like, it actually did change everything. Like, it changed me. It changed the way people interacted with me when I brought up these issues. It changed the way the community that I was focusing on felt about the work. Like, it really was a complete 360. I've done so many marches and I was like tired. Like I was like, I'm tired of marching, tired of yelling in the street, tired of stopping traffic, tired of risking my life, dealing with tear gas or rubber bullets, the police, feeling exhausted, getting home at the end of the day and feeling like what was that for? Like, I was tired of that feeling. And this is no shade and no offense to anyone who marches, because I still feel like there's so much value in that, because it does bring attention to issues. Like, it's the easiest way to bring attention to an issue, to have a huge million people walking in the street. But for me, as far as like emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally, I was like, it's just put me in a much better position. And I think, getting back to ideas around Black feminism, that's also part of the work, is like, and part of what I've learned from, the people who I look up to and whose work I research and read to kind of like give me a solid foundation. They're like, precautionary tales, right? Because a lot of these women, they poured so much effort into work and died way too early, right? A lot of them died way too early, sometimes alone, broke, tired, and feeling like, I did all this and where did it get me? And I feel like as ancestors, they look at me and they say, girl, you better take care of yourself, right? Make sure that whatever you're doing is not just feeding the people that you care about, but it's feeding you as well. So that was part of it too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so important. I love that. I wanted to bring up really quickly, and I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's called Social Change Now, A Guide for Reflection and Connection by Deepa Iyer, and it's the social change model. And what I love, I'll just quickly share this little bit of the screen. So it shows like for people who are trying to work towards equity, social equity, liberation, justice, solidarity, right? Like this is the goal. And then if you're listening in the center, there's the goal. And then all around the outside are these different circles. And each of them, it's not hierarchical, right? That's the BS that we're used to living inside of white supremacy. It is everything's equally important. And so the healers, the weavers, the guides, the storytellers, all of them are equally important, just the same as the frontline responders. So we need those frontline responders, the ones that are out there doing that marching there, but we just as much need the people like you who are the storytellers, right? You're telling the stories about these people that have been forging this change. So anyway, like I think it's just so important for us to all remember when we're thinking about activism, because there are people who, even some of the very well-meaning people who are activists that are out on the streets, who will make others feel like you're not doing it right if you're not out here with me. But we all have our role to play, and we need to figure out what is the role for us. And that role can change too, right? In our 20s, maybe being
Exactly.
in the street is the role. And by the time we're in our 40s and 50s, that may not be our role anymore. And that's also okay as long as we still are taking a role. So
Exactly. 100%. Being flexible and moving with the time and figuring out what works best for you. I 100% agree. I love that.
yeah, and all credit to Taina Brown, who's the co-host of my other podcast, Messy Liberation, for bringing that to my awareness. And it has really been amazing for me and understanding that approach to activism. So I want to talk about the Free Black Women's Library. I always get the words in different orders. Which you said you started in 2015. So 2014 is when the idea was starting to come about, and then you started
Mhm.
with 100 books written by
Mhm.
Black women and Black non-binary artists. And you started by just traveling around New York City, where you are, doing sort of these little pop-up installations where you would have the books along with performances, discussions, readings, things like that.
Yep.
So we can talk more about how it functioned, but first I want to know, how did you choose the 100 books?
Well, here's the tea. When I first dreamed up the project, I was like, okay, this is going to be a community project. And I wanted to feel like I'm co-creating this project with my community. So I sent an email out to everyone I knew saying, hey, y'all, I'm starting this project called the Free Black Women's Library, where I'm going to center and celebrate Black women writers. I got a P.O. box and I said, if you have any books that you would like to donate, please mail them to this P.O. box or drop them off at my house. Or if you think that there's a book that you find really important, really significant, that you think I need to have in this library, send me that title. And that's where it started. People started sending me books. They started coming in the mail, and they're still coming in the mail. I just went to my P.O. box this morning and got 2 packages. I haven't opened them yet, so I don't know what they are, but
Well, you got to make sure you give us the PO box so I can put that in the show notes. So that
Oh
means you're accepting donations of books. So people, when they're done reading something by a Black
yeah, all the
author, they
time.
can say, and Black women, Black non-binary authors, not so much Black men, right?
Yes,
Or have
not
you?
right
Okay, making
now.
sure. Okay.
Right
So
now.
they can still send you those things. That's great. Now, of those first 100-ish books, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very curious. Did you get a whole bunch of one or two? Like, I'm just thinking, like, because sometimes I see you share on social media, and we'll talk about what you do on Sundays with the library, but I see some of the things you're sharing, and I see some of the same themes, some of the same people. Like, I see a lot
Yeah.
of Octavia Butler, I see a lot of bell hooks that comes through. Like,
Yeah.
so were those first 100 books, was there a lot of overlap, or were you
Yeah,
surprised
there
by what came?
was. There was. The first 100 books, there was a lot of Toni Morrison. People, she's the GOAT, right? Toni Morrison, most specifically Beloved. For about the first year of the library, I had so many copies of Beloved. I was like, yo, what's up with this book? It was really like out of maybe 300 books around the 6 month, I think I had 20 to 30 copies of Beloved, different editions. And I was like, this is very interesting. And part of the reason why I started to create like wish lists and like special requests is because I wanted to make sure that the collection was diverse, right? Because I love Toni Morrison. Like, I feel like she's a genius, but I didn't want a Toni Morrison library. So I started to make wish lists. I started to ask people, please, I need more children's books. I need more YA. I need more nonfiction. I need more science fiction, right? I need books about health and beauty. I need books about pregnancy. I need books about travel. I need poetry books. So I started to curate like wish lists and make like special requests. I would write to publishers. I would write to authors. I would write to professors and say, my name is Ola. I have this project and I have this library, and would really be interested in having your book in the collection. And people are extremely kind. Like, I feel so grateful at how kind that community has been. And I think establishing the project in my mind is something I was co-creating with my community is part of the energy that it needed because the book started coming in. I started getting more and more and more and more. But as far as like popularity, like Toni is always popular. Octavia Butler, especially Parable of the Sower, people are obsessed with that book. And now that we're in 2024, during the time when the book actually takes place, people are even more obsessed. Bell Hooks is very extremely popular, especially her book All About Love, which is kind of interesting because I think her other books are better. But that's
I
just
love that one though. It's right there. But yes, she does have a lot of great books. In fact,
she
I
has a
own a
lot
lot.
of great books, but I
Yeah.
feel like people, unfortunately, I feel like people really center romantic love, so people are gravitate towards that one
I'll
more than
only point out that I think it is about far more than romantic love.
it is
But yes, I do hear what
100%.
you're saying. I hear what you're
But
saying.
I think people reach for it because they
Yeah.
think that that's what it is.
They're just looking for that self-help, help me help me find love, right? What I love is that she sort of sneaks in the like, you came here thinking I'm going to tell you how to find a man, basically, and guess what? It is not about that. It is about learning to love yourself and love your community, and yeah, I think it's
100%.
yeah,
I love Bell Hooks. She's one of my
yes,
favorite thinkers, writers,
me
everything.
too.
Um, but yeah, and one thing I notice is that there's like reading trends that take place. Like,
Mm.
I'm about to get into uh the 10th year of doing this, and I notice that people tend to gravitate towards certain readers or certain themes, depending on the time of year, depending on what's going on in the world. When I first started the project, people were definitely reading a lot of Toni Morrison, and right around the time that like Black Panther came out and like Jordan Peele was very popular, Jordan Peele movies, like the race-based horror movies, there was a lot of interest in speculative fiction and sci-fi and Afrofuturism. So people were gravitating more towards those books. by writers like N.K. Jameson and Nnedi Okorafor and Tananarive Due and Nalo Hopkinson. And then when the pandemic started and people were dealing with a lot of like sadness and loneliness and grief, people were gravitating more towards like self-help books and like life strategy and personal development and just how to deal with grief, like healing practices, healing justice, reproductive justice, like transformative justice, like ideas around like how to be a better community member, how to be a better you. Those books became to like more people had more interest and were asking about those titles more. At the school start of the school year, it's always different from like the summertime when people want romance. People always want romance in the summer. People want beach reads. People want travel reads, books that are lighthearted, short story collections. So it's fascinating.
It is
Like I'm
fascinating.
learning all these different things about like just like there's fashion trends, there's reading trends. So that was a big surprise because I didn't even know.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot. I learned a
Is
lot.
there a great white whale, to reference a book, for your library, like a book that is something that people think about, but it's maybe out of print. It's been like you haven't been able to get a hold of it, or something that you don't get enough copies, but people just want to read?
That's a great question. I can't think of an exact book title, but I do know that there is a strong hunger and desire for books around sexuality, um, from a Black perspective, right? Books around sexuality and gender. And not just like, queerness or bisexuality or, gay, straight, but actual, like, how do I say this? Like what gender represents within Black culture, right? And I do know that there's a hunger for texts with Black queer characters in fiction, especially for young folks. They're looking for that representation.
Mhm.
That's something that I get a lot is folks in their like 20s, mid-20s who come to the library and they're looking for books where they can read about themselves, right? And whether it's about being asexual, right? Or whether it's about thinking that they might be trans, or whether it's about um thinking that they might have dealt with some type of sexual trauma, and they're not sure how to process it. Like those type of books, we don't have enough of those. At least I don't have enough of those in my library. Like I have a few, but I'm always looking for more, and I'm always like reading and scouring the internet to see what's out there. And just even like the invention of gender,
Mm.
right? And this idea around gender when it relates to Black folks, because we have a complicated relationship with gender, especially when it comes to like within an American context. Because Black people were not considered to be human, the idea around what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man as it relates to Black folks is like very complicated,
Mm.
right? Because some of us are struggling with this idea of not wanting to be attached to the Western definitions or what they might consider like European definitions. So they want to know what, back in ancient time before we were colonized, right? What how do we relate to each other?
Mm.
Like people want to talk about matriarchal societies. And like, is that a thing or is it like mythic? Is it like romanticizing our history? So those kind of things I haven't found enough texts about. There's a few. And then there's also a huge interest in spirituality from the Black perspective, from the Black woman's perspective. Like when it comes to religion, like that's another thing. Like our relationship with religion is also complicated because religion was used
Right.
as a tool for colonization, but people want to have a relationship with a higher power. So there's this conflict of, I want to have a spiritual relationship. I want to have a higher power. I want to pray. I want to go to church, but I also don't want to be, I don't want to find myself associating with something that was used to dehumanize and subjugate Black people. So it's complicated. Everything is complicated,
But it's so
but
interesting how all of that, like, from this, again, it feels like how the library, whether it's this project or any library, really is a social art project because of all of these dynamics that come out of discussing books. I mean, they represent our stories. And so there is just so
yeah.
much to it. Okay, so to keep us on track, because there's still so much I want to know about, you went from that 100 books in 2015 to where you're at now of more than 6,000 books in
Yeah.
fairly quick time. I mean, it's been 10 years, but I think it was even sooner than that happened. When did you move in? Because at first you were just, this is kind of a trunk of my car. I'm showing up, I'm setting up a thing. That becomes pretty hard when you're over 1,000 books and certainly at 6,000 books. So when did you get physical space? You're in Brooklyn. When did you secure a place to actually have your library?
I got the space about 2 years ago.
Okay.
So basically, with the library, I would take the collection of books to public parks, barbershops, clothing stores, museums, art galleries, and I would install the collection in that space and activate the space with some type of workshop, a performance, a discussion. And once I got to 1,000 books, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Then it became 2,000, then it became 3,000. And I got to a point where I had about 4,000 books and I could no longer keep them in my apartment. So I put them in a storage space. And whenever I would have to do an event at a space, I would go to the storage space, pack up the books in boxes, put them in an Uber, take the Uber or the Lyft to the space, unpack the books, install them, activate the space. And the books would be in that location, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes for a month, sometimes 3 months, sometimes just a day. But it was a lot. Physically, I felt myself feeling like, okay, there has to be a better way. So it was either get an actual bookmobile type of van situation and drive around with that, or get a brick and mortar. And in 2020, when the whole world shut down, I was like, wow, this is a very fascinating time because I'm not in the position to do these installations. Like the biblio installations, chopped. It wasn't happening. So I did a lot of stuff over Zoom. I did a lot of like virtual workshops and virtual events and conversations and things. And it was nice because I got to interact with people from all over the world. So the library became a more global entity, but I also missed that intimacy of like the one-on-one. And I was like, you know what? Maybe there's a way that I can eliminate that back and forth with the Ubers and Lyfts and have the library in a space and have all the events in a space, right? In Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, which is where the library began and where I live. So I launched the GoFundMe and said, if I can raise $100,000, that means that it's meant to be.
When you said that, did it feel realistic to you, or did you
No,
think, okay? Because that seems like, I don't know, for some people it might not seem like a lot, but to me, I'm like, well,
it's
that's
not.
because you're basically relying on your network to then share and amplify that. And that's, if you don't, depending on the size of your
During
network,
a
that's a,
pandemic.
exactly. Well, I mean, maybe there's an advantage there. People are home, but they were also worried about money. But yeah, I don't know. Like, that's a lot of money. So you did not think this is going to happen.
I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I was optimistic, but I was like, if it doesn't work out, it's okay. But once I got to like 60, 70, I was like, I think this is going to happen. But it was a lot of work. It was so much work. Like, to anyone who's watching this or listening to this, crowdfunding is not easy work. That is the hardest thing to do, is raising money, asking people for money, getting them to trust you, being persistent, sharing that link every single day, thinking of new ways to share an idea, reaching out beyond your immediate community.
Yeah, because they're going to get tapped out pretty quickly.
Exactly. And they don't have money anyway. Like trying to figure out your supply, it was hard. It was so hard, but we made it to 100K and I was like, okay, this is happening. So I looked for a storefront space and I had in mind the type of space I wanted. I knew I didn't want it to be too big. I knew I wanted it to have a backyard so that we could have a garden, an outdoor space would be really nice. And I searched and searched, and it took me a while to find a space. And then when I found a space, I got scammed a couple of times, I'm not gonna lie, but I finally found a space. And then it took about 7 to 10 months to renovate it. And then we opened. We opened in 2022. And yeah, it's been great. It's
So
been
now that
fantastic.
you're in a space,
Mm-hmm.
it's a little different than the original vision for what you had, where it was this
Yeah.
sort of activating different communities and popping up, and it could start to function more like a library or a store in a traditional sense. And I know that's not, I don't think that was your aim or continues to not be your aim. So tell me how it works and how you keep it from veering into like we're just now becoming a business, a store, or we're becoming a traditional library because there's so many of those out there. What are you doing? I know that you do a lot of things beyond just the book swap. So tell me about the non-book piece, and then we'll talk about how the actual book part functions.
Well, I wanted this space to be a care space, right? I wanted it to be a reading room, a literary hub, a social site, a Black feminist archive, and a community care space. I wanted it to be a space where people could come and interact with the books in a way that felt good for them, interact with the collection. And even if they aren't so much interested in the collection, I wanted this space to be a space where they could come and just relax. Part of the issue with Bed-Stuy specifically, and I would say Brooklyn, certain parts of Brooklyn, is gentrification, right? This place at this time, from when I started the library up until now, is being gentrified in a way that's really scary and feels somewhat violent. This used to be a really a Black diasporic neighborhood. Like Brooklyn used to be one of these places where you would find Black businesses on every corner, and you would find people from all over the world who identify as Black living here, whether it be from the Caribbean, from the continent, from the South, from the Midwest. It was just really rich, right? And there were issues, of course, but there were some moments around the 20 aughts when I don't know, it just became like this hip neighborhood and everybody wanted to move here. And there were a lot of articles, like there was an article in the New York Times, like up and coming. And all of a sudden, all of these businesses started disappearing. And all these community spaces were disappearing and being replaced by wine bars and coffee shops. And it was like, what's happening?
And
So
just for people who may not understand gentrification, like, so what happened then is as soon as it sort of becomes this up and coming area, then folks who have not historically been a part of the community are coming in from the outside. Often that means white people, not always, but often. And they're coming in and driving up the prices, right? Because,
driving up the
yeah,
rent.
exactly. So then the people who are from that community can no longer afford the community they're from. And that is how this sort of takeover happens. So I just want to make sure that I think most people understand gentrification at this point, but just in case.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really scary to witness it. And not just driving up the rent, but changing the energy of the neighborhood and bringing a sense of entitlement and an attitude that feels like, well, you moved here because you thought this place was cool, but now you're trying to take away the coolness. like doing stuff like calling the police on the ice cream truck because you think the music is too loud.
There's this white saviorism piece that happens too, of people thinking, oh, well, we've come in and we've made this neighborhood better, because in their mind, white is better, right? Like even if they're not consciously aware of that, we've come in and fixed things for you. And so
Yeah,
then don't understand why people are upset. And there's so much of that like entitled attitude of, what are you talking about? We've made this better for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So part of the reason why I really wanted to have the library space in Bed-Stuy was because I wanted to have a space for Black people, right? Now, that doesn't mean that other people are not allowed to be in the library space, right? The library is open for all races, all genders, all ages to come and use the space. And we have non-Black people in the space all the time, having a good old time, right? But I felt like it was important to have a Black space in this neighborhood that's been traditionally and historically Black. Like, there are people who are getting their brownstones, their homes stolen right from under them because of like deed theft and like tax issues, like homes that have been in someone's family for generations. All of a sudden, you see all their stuff on the street. Like it's really sad and it's really scary. So the library, like the books are a key integral part of it, but our brick and mortar space is a community space and it's free, right? And so part of the difference between the library and like a business is that it's free. You don't have to have any money to come and sit in the library and take a nap. You don't have to pay a fee. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to like books. You can come and use the space to get on a computer and fill out a Medicaid application, right? Because we have Wi-Fi. Shout out to Drew Barrymore, who donated like 10 laptops to the library so that we have laptops that folks can come and use to fill out job applications, fill out applications for health insurance or an apartment.
You have a period pantry, I read as well, which I
Have
think
a
is
period pantry, which
wonderful.
offers free menstrual supplies for anyone who might need them, because period poverty is real and it's one of the number one issues. Women who are struggling with poverty, women who are unhoused, women who are living in unstable environments don't have access to those supplies. And that is an issue. That's a human issue. Like that's a human right? So people can come and take whatever they need from the period pantry and use those things at no cost. We also have a free store, which offers new and gently used clothing and shoes and accessories and small items to anyone who might need them. And that has been absolutely incredible for folks who are cash poor and who might need clothing to wear to church or to wear to a job interview or to wear to school, different things like that. Like these are small little things that I feel like anyone could do if they had the space, I guess, that really offer people their humanity back. Because I think that's one of the biggest issues around poverty is that it really robs you of your humanity. It makes you feel like you're less than because you don't have the basic things that you
By
need.
design.
Right. And there's like this negligence that takes place where people are like, oh, well, how come you don't have that? And it's like, because it's expensive. Like a box of tampons is like $15 sometimes. And it's like, yeah, like I had a woman who almost started crying when I told her that she could take whatever she wanted because she was like, I'm walking around with like a roll of tissue in my underwear because I can't afford to get pads. And I'm like, please take whatever. And she started crying. I was like, okay, if you start crying, I'm gonna start crying. So don't start crying.
But I can see
Like,
how this feels like that difference. Again, we need the folks who are marching. So this is not to say that what they're doing isn't also incredibly valuable. It is. And I can see how this would feel very different in that way that you said that it does feel more empowering and like you're taking action, meaning because you can see the action happening, even if
yeah,
it's one on one or one on 10 versus, the goal of maybe changing laws that will affect everyone. Those things that happen that we do inside of our own community are life changing for the person you're helping, and it sounds like for you.
it really is. It really is. I mean, it feels so tender and it feels so encouraging. And it offers me, it encourages me to keep going. And it lets me know that what I'm doing is actually making a difference. And that's really powerful for me. And yeah, I definitely believe in like the marching, the chanting, like, burn it all down. Like that's so important. But for my own temperament, my own like mental health, and my own capacity, I'm glad that I found something that works for me, because it's been very healing as well. Because I want to be the type of person that leaves the world better than the way I found it. And I feel like I found my way of doing that,
Mm.
by doing this work. So even though like you said, like the library, it's a library and it works in the same way a library does, and that it's an open free space that you can use to come and like chill and read and do work. But there's also these mutual aid initiatives that I've tacked on, and then there are also the free events that we have every weekend. Writing workshops, painting workshops, sewing workshops, film screenings, game nights, beekeeping workshops, herbalism workshops, community conversations about accessing insurance, or talking about mental health, reproductive health, parenting, different things like that, safety, street harassment, self-defense, all these different things we have, and all the events we have are always free, because for me, it's about making this information and these moments accessible, because
Yeah.
all of these things do exist in Brooklyn and in New York City and in the world at large, but oftentimes to access these type of things, it requires money. It requires privilege, right? To have a conversation where you get to have a deep, integral, detailed conversation about the writing of Zora Neale Hurston, you might have to be in a college course where you're paying up to 2 to 5 grand, right? But at the library, you can come and you can have that same conversation about The Eyes of Watching God and Mules and Men and Dust Track on the Road, and engage in like a really hearty, rich discourse with other people, and walk away feeling fed, but your pockets haven't been drained as a result, you know.
Yeah.
So
Well,
and sewing workshops where people are learning like real life skills, like learning how to sew means that you can like not just fix your own clothes, but maybe make clothes that you can actually sell so you can make a little money to feed your family, right? Learning how to make jewelry, learning about how to heal your body by using herbs, learning how to meditate, can help you deal with stress and your nervous system. Like all these different things to me are so integral to life, like the quality of life, but oftentimes having the ability to do them, it doesn't feel like accessible. It doesn't feel like it's for you because because of the price or because of the location,
yeah.
right? Like right here in your neighborhood, you have a space where you can go right around the corner and you can sit with someone else, you have a conversation. And the other thing I really like about the library is the intergenerational factor, getting to see like teenagers interact with elders, getting to see people in their 20s interact with people in their 70s and talk about pleasure and accessing pleasure in the body, and talk about dating and relationships with like older people who may not have access to their own parents because maybe they are incarcerated, or they're no longer alive, or they've been excommunicated because they're queer, like, and
Yeah.
having those moments. It's just so sweet. I love it so much.
I can tell you do, and I think it's beautiful. And I want to talk about the money piece. You started to talk about. I want to talk a little bit more, but before we do, one last thing on the actual functioning of it. So the piece around the books, you do it's a swap, right? So someone to get a book, you bring in a book. So it functions a little different than a library. You're not checking it out and bringing it back, and it's also not a store because you're not purchasing it. It's this sort of swap system, right?
Yes. Yes. So the way the library works is every Sunday we have a book swap session. The library is open from 1 to 6. You bring a book written by a Black woman or Black non-binary writer. You get to look through the collection and you trade with any book from the collection. So some people bring one book and they get to take one. Some people bring two, five, 10. So your books are basically your currency. And the books you take, they can be your books that you keep forever if you fall in love with them and you're like, I want to keep these. You can keep them, or you can bring them back and trade again. So there are some folks who've been trading books with the library for years now, since 2015. They've come in and they are working their way through a specific section, or they're reading the work of a specific author. So every month they come in, they trade one for one, two for two, three for three. And that's something that I've done since the very beginning. Like the free store, the period pantry, all the different events, that's all new. But since the very first time that I set those 100 books up on that stoop in Bed-Stuy in the summer of 2015, since that very first trade that I did with a sweet little 8-year-old girl, I've been trading books since then. So I've traded thousands and thousands of books at this point with all different types of people.
I love it. That's so great. And
Time I do a trade, I take a picture of people with the book. So if you go to my Instagram, you'll see a picture, a bunch of pictures of people with the books in their hands. They might have like, they might have like this book and this book. So
yeah,
yeah.
I will put a link to your Instagram in the show notes. And
So
that's,
you get to see what people are reading, what people are trading, what books are coming in, what type of people use the library. And it's really fun. It's
yeah,
really
that's where I've been following along and seeing what are some of the common themes. Again, a lot of bell hooks, a lot of Octavia Butler, but then it's always interesting to me too for stocking my own TBR list to look at what are some of the books I haven't yet heard of, which is always kind
yeah.
of cool to me too. So I
Yeah.
want to talk about money.
A lot of Jessamine Ward.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Who I have not read, but is in my TBR. I
Yeah.
have like
Yeah. The
three
New
or
York
four.
Times put out a list of like must best books of the past century or something. And Jessamine Ward was on the list a couple of times. So as a result, people came in asking for her books. And I was like, yes, Jessamine Ward is one of the best writers. She's such an amazing writer. So I'm glad that she's getting a,
Yeah.
a little bit more
Where should
attention.
I start? Because I have like four of them in my TBR, or three of them. So I don't know which one I should start with.
Mhm. Probably Sing Unburied Sing.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you for the tip. Okay. I want to talk money because we only have a little bit of time left. And obviously, a lease in Brooklyn cannot be inexpensive. And as you've talked about with gentrification, I'm sure it's only getting more expensive. You
Yeah.
started with that initial $100,000 GoFundMe, but that's been a few years now.
That's been
And
great.
I'm assuming you've burned through that already with rent there. So what are you doing? Like, what is the ongoing support? You mentioned Give Butter, which is something like Patreon, and that you raised 50,000 for this year. Are you just basically still doing crowdfunding every year? And do you have a certain goal amount every year?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, this is part of where I don't have a lot of knowledge. uh and possibly, I don't know if it's a sustainable business model, but basically crowdfunding, Give Butter. I don't use GoFundMe because they are kind of problematic. So I'm glad that Give Butter exists now. I don't know if Give Butter exists when I first launched my original GoFundMe. So with Give Butter, I do this thing where I try to raise 50,000 to cover the entire year. And what that covers is the rent, the insurance, the water, the internet, the supplies that we need for the space, that 50K. So if I'm able to raise 50K, that means that I'm covered for the whole year. I was able to raise 50K for 2024. So now I'm working on raising 50K for 2025. And until I find some genius business manager, financial wizard to tell me a new and better way to do it, That's how I'm doing it.
Which we talked a little bit before when we chatted about a nonprofit. You haven't set up as a nonprofit. You're
No,
not making a profit, but you're not functioning as a nonprofit through the tax code. So you're sort of a not profitable business, but really functioning. It's basically a nonprofit without that status, right? But
right.
that would open up a lot more charitable giving opportunities, probably. But I know that there's a lot of, it's complicated to set that up. So you're still sort of navigating that. But what I'm also hearing is you're not getting paid.
No, I'm not getting paid. And I honestly, I don't know, like this might be a weird tangent, but I'm starting to think that because I'm an artist by nature, I don't have like practical notions around money.
Yes, the
And
starving artist thing.
yeah, like it's so funny because like I have a really good friend who is a Taurus, I'm an Aquarius, and I remember like year 4 of the library, I was talking to her about it, and she was like, do you, when you make your budget for the year, do you factor in your salary? And I was like, salary? What are you talking about? And she was like, you realize that people get paid for what you're doing. Like what you're doing is a job. It's actually a full-time job, and the people who do what you do get paid for it.
And get
So
benefits.
she was like, when you do your budget, you need to factor in your own salary. And I had never thought of it. Like it blew my mind. So I have a Patreon, and my Patreon is what I use as my salary. And my Patreon basically goes towards rent and groceries because I don't have a lot of patrons. But I'm trying to figure out how to change that because it's not sustainable to live like this.
No, how are you live? I mean, you don't have to share any more than you want to, but like, how are you living if it's been several years? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time without getting paid. Are you in a partnership that allows that or something?
No, I work.
So you're working full time while doing this?
I'm not working right now, but I was working up until like 2 years ago. I work as a set dresser. I work in film and TV.
Wow, that's a cool job.
I love it. I'm a set decorator and a set dresser for film and TV. So the work that I do Monday through Friday, and I haven't worked in about 2 years now because of COVID, because the industry strikes, and the industry shut down. So I haven't been able to get on a project for a while. So I'm desperately looking for work now. And I also have a artist residency at the Metropolitan Museum, which gives me a small stipend. So I had an artist residency at the museum. I had an artist residency at a place called Brick, which is an art center in Brooklyn. And through those residencies, I get honorariums and stipends and things like that. And I'm pretty low frills, no frills. Like I'm not a really high end type of person. I don't really buy clothes or do anything. So I'm able to just like scrape by.
Yeah, but you
Uh,
still live in one of the most expensive cities in the world. So,
yeah, yeah.
so people listening, if anyone's listening to this, we need to help you because what you're doing is
It's a
amazing.
little rough out here. It's a little rough out.
Yeah.
Like, I love being a set dresser and I love being a set decorator, but because of all the things that have been going on within the industry, and unfortunately because of like AI, and different things, it kind of feels like my job and my desire and my passion for set decorating, it feels like there's it's I have limited opportunities to do that work these days. So I've been thinking about other ways to make money. And, that's been kind of difficult to me emotionally because it's been my dream from like a child to be a production designer for film. has been like one of my biggest dreams. And it's something that I've been holding on to in a really stubborn manner. But the older I get, the more I wonder if that's something I'm going to be able to make real. There's a lot of nepotism within the industry, and there's a lot of ageism, and of course racism, and of course sexism. So I feel like I'm battling multiple isms at this point because there are people in their 20s who are coming out of top arts institutions like NYU and SCAD who are able to jump right in to the positions that I would normally go for, but I'm not being hired for those because so, you know,
All right,
I'm
well, come on,
it's kind of
Shonda
a
Rhimes and Ava DuVernay, and who are some of the other people that should know and say, yeah. But
it,
also
it's
going
hard.
back to
It's a little hard out here, but but I do things for my patrons and I try to push my Patreon as much as I can, but it is uncomfortable and it is awkward for me to like ask for help
yeah,
and
because
ask
you
for money.
mentioned that you're trying to find ways to monetize without compromising the integrity of the project. And I think that's beautiful that you're very concerned about integrity, yours, the projects. And also, it sounds to me like there's still a lot more you could do and still remain very much in integrity. I would imagine that every person who's using that facility or even giving to that facility probably thinks and certainly would expect and be thrilled for you to be paid for your efforts and time. So,
Yeah, people are always surprised, like when I mention, oh, if you'd like to support the library, you can donate to this. People are like, oh, I thought this was a city-funded space. Like people, and I'm like, no, it's not. Sometimes people are like, how do you pay for this space? And I always say through donations, and they're like, really? Okay, here's a donation. Here's $20. Here's $10. I'm like, thank you.
and all of that probably adds
I
up.
also have merchandise.
Oh, nice. Oh, I saw the top of the shirt, but I didn't know it was yours. I love it. For
Shirt.
people not looking, it's a beautiful shirt of a woman, a black woman sitting on a yellow chair reading in front of a very like a
Yes,
wall of books. Love it.
yes, yes. So you can definitely buy some merch. I have t-shirts and stickers and
And those
buttons.
available online, not just in person.
Mhm. It was
Okay.
available online
I'll link to it in the show notes.
through my bonfire store. So I have been working with a graphic designer to come up with some really dope designs of items so that just to pull, bring in more, bring in more funding through monetizing. I'm like, merch is a really simple way to spread the message of the library and also make a little money.
Yeah.
So that has been a nice little stream.
So there's
Um,
lots of ways for people who are listening to support because normally I ask my the folks who are being interviewed for organizations doing good work in the world and I make a donation to say thank you for your time, but we already know the organization that's doing good work in the world here is your organization. So I would encourage listeners to do the same thing, to go and spread some wealth around for either your Give Butter campaign, which goes directly to funding the rent, the utilities, and those things for the library itself, or to your Patreon, which goes to support you, which also is very important. And I think the people listening to this will recognize that because we run businesses and we know that our time is also valuable. So I will link to both of those things so people can find them. Normally, I also ask for a book, but you've given so many throughout this that I don't even think we really need to do that because this whole thing was about books and we've talked about so many. So I think we'll wrap up here. And I actually wanted to talk to you about one last thing, which I think we'll do in our bonus content if you're okay with it, which is about the additional branches that you guys have in other cities. So I'd love to talk a little bit about what that looks like, how that happened, how they function. So if you're interested in learning more about that part, about the other 5 free women's library or free Black women's library locations and how that all came about, make sure you subscribe to the Substack at Feminist Founders and you can get that conversation. Thank you, Ola, for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. I know that I tend to ramble sometimes, but this has been great to talk about and think about. And I love that it's called Feminist Founders because I feel like feminism is being co-opted and commodified, and we need to take that word back
Well, I am so glad you said that,
Let
because that is my mission too, because I'm full, and that's why I always ask that first question about feminism, because I want to honor the fact that I recognize that feminism is too much or too often white feminism, and that is not what my feminism is, and that is not what feminism is. And I am the same way of like, I want to take it back. I also worry though, if it doesn't turn some people off that would actually agree if they would just listen and understand that the feminism is showing up this way. But I appreciate you saying that, because that helps to reaffirm that, yes, let's own this, because we
let's
cannot let the
own
J.K.
it.
Rowlings of the world try to take feminism and own it.
That part. That part.
Yeah.
Yeah. People are confused. People are confused. I just had a workshop on feminism on Sunday, last weekend at the
Oh,
library,
cool.
and you would be surprised. People still don't have a clear understanding of what it means.
Oh, I wouldn't be
Still,
surprised,
yeah,
sadly, because I
yeah.
know. Anyway, okay. Well, thank you, Ola. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Founders podcast. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, or if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing with the show, please visit feministfounderspodcast.com. There you can find out about becoming a paid subscriber for as little as the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, which will directly support my work. Thanks again, and I can't wait for our next episode.